Hello, cruel world. Welcome to my channel. I call myself Ralph Schism. Ralph has been my many years pen name that I use. I'm actually going to change my name properly to Ralph soon. Now, I'm going to use 3 or 4 words or terms now that the average viewer, because I've been in this kind of mode for 20 years, the average viewer is going to jump to conclusions, so I'll have to quickly allay those assumptions. Above all, this morning, I operate, even the word operate is not really me. I operate Rome sometimes, 25% of the time for the last 10 years, and 10% of the time for the more or less 20 years previously. From Bishop's Castle in the north down to Brecon in the south. This area is called the Marches. And gradually over those years it became a theme park. Now nobody's going to believe that without good written stories, which will never identify anybody in any way, because I've never met anybody worth identifying. We'll get to that another day. Right. So, above all, although I've done 3 or 4 things, let's just push in quickly, though this isn't actually me. I had a professional vocation for 20 years, despite having considerable kind of problems in a way in my 20s. I was not a steady, I was the ultimate atomized, selfish person. I don't think I hurt anybody. But anyway, age around 30, a huge change happened, wonderful, that sorted me out for the rest of life, and I stopped thinking about myself. Now, I started the name ralphschism.com, although I already had it as Ralph Schism blogspot. I was riffing a bit, but I started that name on the 22nd of February this year. I didn't even plan that day. I don't have much money to spare. And that was the day that somebody, the only person for many years, a woman, decided she wasn't going to speak with me anymore. We'd had a very, very intense 2 or 3 months. Pretty good speaking. Now, sounds a bit creepy. Not at all, because I knew, even if the one person who pretty much everything that I've been writing, thinking about, and I'm going to further write about, if it's too much for them, I just go in the countryside for hours, just by myself. I've had a walking companion occasionally the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Anyway, let's keep to the point. Nevertheless, that day, I still felt energized. Everything that I've been kind of in the back of my mind, it's time to put out into the world. I really need to do it because I have useful things to share. Maybe one day she'll read it and change her mind. In other words, there's something alive in the background, but I don't know. Because the things I like, enjoy, and certainly not to hurt anybody, enjoy sharing, they're the good things of good novels, not even of old. D.H. Lawrence, George Eliot, Rachel Cusk, etc. They're the things of good literature. And years ago I actually had a bookshop for 5 years. I know my good literature, but good literature saved my life. It enabled me to develop an imagination as to the important kind of imagination, how life should be. That's not something that's a snap kind of, I got this idea this day. No, it's how life, society might be more healthily ticking over. I know I'm good at that, but we should leave that aside. So, a few phrases. First of all, okay, well, I don't even normally wear a shirt like this, but there's a small town down there and I can't identify it because I'm going to actually say why is it suddenly kind of precipitated in this one moment into I gotta really stop all my previous roles and simply just focus on writing. Small town down there, and it's a little bit of a kind of they'd hate to call themselves yuppies, but the well-to-do have colonised it, whilst pretending that they wouldn't dream of buying a house that some local might need to rent. No. They've all colonised it. It's like a Primrose Hill in the Marches. Right, I've been living in this van. I never used to like saying this. It's like I've had quite a lot to do with itinerant, vanish life for years. I adore the freedom. And furthermore, if you're off in your van, I would be going off in my van with my daughter 20 years ago. You wake up a lot, 6 in the morning, you're in a different place. I know the quiet places, all the quiet places for 50 miles. You wake up in the morning and your head is as sharp as razor wire, and you get in to your whatever you're doing, if you have to do boring administration, or if you want to do something creative like writing, which is my main thing. Right, to the point. Now, I am actually doing a few items of washing. My life is so simple. Ooh, careful of that. The one thing you don't want is burns, obviously. My life is so simple that I got it down to one 10-minute hand wash per week. I mean, what kind of a wonderful life is that, right? And I wasn't even planning on doing this today, but there's a good tap there, so use the good tap. Right, why have I turned my camera on now, and why is it time for introduction to the channel now? Right, so I have my shirt on. It's just because I sort of, one can have different personas, and most of the people that have come, almost all the people that have come to live around here, actually, they don't say they're from cities, they've inherited money, that kind of thing, and they dress like they're at Glastonbury, and it's so dull. I don't wear anything ever as in a reactionary way. It's just seeming like a little bit of a sort of worldly, once-moneyed person that kind of can cut through sometimes if you're wanting to speak with people intelligently. Now, I should be taking this shirt off now. That's my normal shirt. Right. About 10% of the time, about 20% since early 2020, actually 2019. There was a reason for 2019. I do. Now this is the phrase that, like, please, right? I'm a proper thinker. I understand what Thomas Bernard is all about in his magnificent, probably the greatest book of the last 75 years, book Extinction. A very hard book. Now that's not me being pretentious. I wasn't that person 30 years ago. In fact, I've ploughed through it twice. Okay, I can read Rachel Kushner's magnificent book, Mars Room, and understand. It's a universal book. She's trying to reflect upon the universal human condition. And that's a magnificent book because it doesn't have any pity in it. You don't learn from pity. You just don't learn from it. I learned from her book, and I don't feel like many books I learn from. To the point. So 10 or 20% of the time, I do what could be called, unpaid by the way. Occasionally people may offer they'll pay expenses, but they never do. More importantly, the beginning of engaging, I speak of a healthy, real, rural mutual benefit. Now, in rural areas, I'm essentially a rural person. Well, I've lived very sophisticated lives in cities, etc. at times. Never me. I can do it though. I could be in the poshest part of London now, transplanted this second, despite having lived like this for 2 years and 8 years previously in the most humble abode up in the hills you could ever imagine. I could transplant to Notting Hill and perform sophisticated, just like that. But in rural areas, if you don't have a income from off, which means you're not earning, essentially even people who are doing cheaper workshops in places like this at £100 a day for a whole day, say, they're living from off because the people who are going to those workshops have earned their money down south. More often than not, they've sold a house down south, which came from inherited money, which might have come from not quite so homespun and super egalitarian sources than they pretend they are when they come to places like this. Now, I refer to the recent arrivals quite a lot, but they're so dull. I've never met one that's interesting. Ordinary people living at £10 to £20 an hour, £15 an hour, actually no, more than 10, more like £10 an hour. They have to cooperate. They have to have a partner. You can't run a vehicle and have any kind of, have a broadband, pay your insurance, etc., etc., all of that, one person alone. And my favourite occupation is doing fencing like that up there and gates like that one there. I love doing that. Very good at it. I learned to do it as a kid with a man called Ralph. A steady, wonderful, great example countryman. So that's what I do 25% of the time for the last 10 years and prior to that. And when you do that, when that's your mode, by the way, with no health and safety gear, using chainsaws with no goggles. Now that might sound reckless. No. If you've learnt to do all of that stuff as a kid, you develop a whole bodily flow that avoids accidents. I know where the danger is. I know where it's going to come from. I've never owned. I will often do very hard outdoor work, in fact I don't even wear Crocs half the time, I just wear sandals, because I'm always spatially aware. My body and mind are totally in tune. From years of that work, I'm always aware what could hurt me. Don't need steel toe caps. It's all laughable. All of this. Anyway, I shall cover that to some extent. But here's the thing. So, I started on something and then I'm looping back round. 10 or 20% of the time I do social work. Now, that I have to qualify, because the middle class people who they've done a little bit of reading, they've read their Guardian, they'll be, we've got to have our social workers, but they don't really want to talk to one, because social workers have talked to people with serious problems. Anyway, let's qualify that right at the beginning. The only reason I call myself qualified to do social work is, and it's not official social work, but it's the reason I'm qualified is because for 7 or 8 years, as of 20 years ago, I happened almost accidentally, there were sort of actually very minor things that came into my gorgeous life, so healthy, with my daughter then 4. And I realised that the whole system is disgusting. It's corrupt, evil, venal, tortures people essentially. And I actually personally, so this is against the government and against social workers, the system. I probably reformed that system alone, finger up, clean finger, battled in. And I didn't actually even have to do it. There were no real allegations against me, but I just discovered a whole kind of horrible, evil, venal kind of worm system. To put it simply in one phrase, although it's there's a whole 10 books behind this. As of about 2008-9, I was very, very, very close to a woman who was a well-known social worker, and she would write books that were in Minister's office. Rachel, I won't even name her. I think she's more or less given up now. And she used to speak to me frankly. She would say, "Hey, mister, the problem with social work is 70% of them, her colleagues, like lifelong colleagues, are just thick." Now, and that, I'm afraid to say, is true. But one could then just kind of add in thick plus they think they're gods. Really is dangerous. So, I don't trust one of them. The system is appalling. After the work I did in public, I then would start to go to court and hold the hands in court when their own lawyers rip them off and rip the state off. Actually, it's well known that family lawyers are the worst of the lot. Women and men who are about to have their children stolen by the state because of incorrect legal treatment. The law is that these people were meant to be helped by the state. No, antagonised, prejudice, etc., etc. I would go and do their court cases with them to try and save their children. So I got rather good at doing social work. Now, last 4 or 5 years, I haven't been to court with anybody. No, it's 4 years. I've encountered, but particularly then in 2020, a dozen people. Organically, it just happens. People I encounter here and there who are in a real mess. Mainly parents who are damaging themselves with the usuals: drink, drugs, or mental illness. And that's cascading onto their children. It's tragic. And it is the most important kind of social work, because if there's anguish and angst in the ordinary life of the parents, then that affects the children for life. So, yeah, I do a bit of social work. Now, the only reason I may refer to that, but I give up. But let's just be clear. I've just seen an hour ago, I had to pop into this small town. I just seen somebody. It's tragic. A woman who I was doing some of the outdoor hedge fence refurbishment work in a property, and I encountered this woman. She's quite well known, so I don't want to identify the town in any way. And then, I think she's about 30 then. God, it was tragic. She'd supposedly, seemingly nice rural place around here. No, she'd been a heroin addict and everything addict. And I got to know her mother very well, because I was working for her with my then partner. Now, if you knew the mother, there was no father. If you knew the mother, it's inevitable. Anyway, so 10 years ago, she'd had 10 years of terrible addictions. It was just so sad. She's kind of a lovely woman. Anyway, so at last, the problem is, you don't hear any wise advice. That's the problem, even round here. With a lot of the people around here they're going to be from Islington and places like that. They don't brag about it, but that's the only way they can afford places. I mean, this new wave started just after Brexit, but they've never got anything intelligent to say. They don't care. They are the problem. But this poor woman, so she's never heard anything intelligent, never had any real help moving out of her addictions. But anyway, so for kind of over about 5 years, I would see her afterwards now and again, and I almost always avoid people like that, but she'd affected me inside, and her brother, just a few years younger. Yes, my role for a while was to try and tidy the property up and even clean up the heroin needles in the grass that the mother hadn't bothered to even do anything about. Yes, even round here. Anyway, 4 or 5 years, she sort of gradually did become totally clean, abstinent, and I would see her occasionally and she'd be full of herself-ish. I think there's been a period of as of 3 or 4 years ago, oh, I found the church, that's... Yeah, I'd just seen her in town with the local... Well, yeah, I know she's back into that way of life. It is so important, and even these small communities around here, all of this is decimated. And seeing her today, I've just spent 3 weeks nearly trying to help somebody, actually with more psychological issues, getting them to a proper counsellor. There are no good counsellors around. But underneath there's more drug issues than I'd realised, and I've got pretty good radar. I give up. But I give up because I saw the woman I met 10 years ago. And I knew, and it's really sad. She's never going to get out of these. They're all just pattern cycles. Anyway, the thing though that, if there's, the point of this video channel is like, I don't want to be, I have to write in a certain way, that if I write, people might think, oh, this person is a fizzing, angry, ranty, off-the-wall person. Because that's the language that is needed, although I try and make it poetical, even funny. But I need people to know that this is the most serious thing in the world, and I'm a very serious person, and I adore my simple... Right, gotta get to this now. That's soaking in hot water. The most important thing is to write anonymously, even poetically, about particularly the last 4 years. Many so-called goody-goodies, well, they believe their image in society, these small places, is of utter goody-goody. Now, occasionally I reach out to them for a little bit of kind of practical assistance. This morning was reaching out to a couple of people I know, and one's very, very senior in the community. I shall not in any way identify her. Do you know, because you see I have nothing to do with drug world, you've got to be careful even here. Do you know any really good drugs worker within 30 miles who I can refer somebody to? Now, despite half an hour of conversation, yeah, it's all virtue signalling, I know that those two different people, they'd consider themselves really good eggs of the community. I know they won't get back to me. Even if they do, in different ways, a whole load of people over, particularly from 2020, have been approached organically, seeing them in the street, having the conversation, which is a serious thing with this person, you know. I'm trying to, and a lot of it, like for example, trying to arrange, it ended about a year and a half ago, but mentoring people who have been in a mess, are still in a bit of a mess. We're talking middle-aged people, we're talking people in their 40s now. And everything this government does, all governments have done for 20 years, has been cynical and almost all spin. But there's been a great programme for years called New Enterprise Allowance to assist somebody who's not been really working properly to take up a small vacation, become self-employed, and it essentially gives them enough money over a period of about 9 months where they don't have to worry anymore, and they can begin with a bit of mentoring with their occupation. They get a bit of money, they can borrow actually 5 or 10 grand even at 6%, which is an extraordinarily good deal, and if you go bust nobody ever comes after you. Anyway, I've mentored about 7 or 8 people towards that. It's a great scheme, I mean, but it does take, each of these people takes 50 hours of one-on-one, and it's like, nobody pays me for it, and I don't believe in being Jesus, so I tell them I don't even want to thanks, but it's actually interesting. It's actually interesting to have seen inside the reality of people who are not so ill that they need permanently be on their PIP payments or whatever. No, because work does change you. something that you're doing yourself that you have a little bit of success with, of course it esteems you. And I've seen the problems, the real problems. There are two problems. The officials, the social workers, etc. They never, ever, it suits them that these people who could work are, let me come round once a month for a cup of tea and to be their best friend, their paid friend. And it's all smiles when, if they actually cared, they would be, none of the people I meet, some have been on partially long-term minor mental health signed off for years. If they do meet a social worker, none of the social workers ever nudge them towards practical steps, NEA for example, and that practical step is great. No, it's appalling, it's disgusting, and they don't do it. That's another day. But I just do this when I meet people if it's obvious that it would benefit them, and I've seen one or two people be really benefited by it. But the point is, so that's the first issue. Nobody in so-called, none of the caring services have got any practical, and I've taught myself this stuff myself, right? How to nudge people here and there. It's appalling. It's almost disgraceful that they're called carers. So there's that. But then all of the middle class goody-goodies who've got time because they actually have got probably pensions from Monsanto they used to work for, but they warp it a bit and say they used to work for The Guardian or whatever. Right? They all day are in the street. Oh, yes. Oh, I know. Do you know, Dura? But when you ask them actually, hey, could you come and sit in with me with somebody who, it's a woman and they're talking to me about their problems and it's not very personal, but I just need somebody as a sort of bit of a witness because there may be false allegations. Unfortunately, Britain is the worst false allegation society in the world. So you just like play little friend, and also you may have some friendly things to put in. I mean, straightforward things like that, or not even sit in, because I don't do it. It's better to go for a walk. Come for a walk with us, I'd feel it would make me feel a little bit safer, because I got to deal with some pretty tough stuff with this person. Yeah. Oh, you can come round to tea. And then it never, ever happens. Ever. I mean, there was a terribly sick woman in summer 2020 who, the only reason I took on this situation was because she was unfortunately staying in a place where I was working, or had been working, and had adopted land for children to ride horses for free during 2020 and 2021. But there's a woman who was coming there occasionally who definitely, no question about it, had serious drink and drug issues. Well, I'm not going to have children coming somewhere where there's somebody with those issues, even though she played the smiley woman. No, it was well known. Anyway, it transpired that she had her liver was officially giving in. So 2 or 3 people, no, actually 4 or 5 people I've known for quite some time. If I can persuade her to go to Narcotics Anonymous, would you share with me? Maybe I'll have to take her 1 week, you the next week, or ideally it's better to have 2 people in the car, because she ain't going to get there herself, and we'd have to go to Bristol or Birmingham. These are people with time and a comfortable life. They're not living on the edge, like where every penny counts, which is what my life has been for 20 years. No, never, and many a time, long conversations with these people who I've known for years, where they show off. They perform themselves. They perform the solutions that they know. But when it comes to actually doing something for somebody who's not far from dying, who they say, well, yeah, they know them. That woman comes into my shop occasionally. Actually doing something? Never. Not even saying, look, I'll sit out here for half an hour. We'll get an email written, which she ain't going to do, to Narcotics Anonymous. Have they got anybody in this area who she can buddy up with? Because she's not going to get onto a computer. She's just, no, nothing. Never. And I'm talking about in dozens of situations, off and on over, well, more the last 4 or 5 years. No, but prior to that, no, actually 7 or 8 years, including a phase of 2 or 3 years. Never. It's like they're well-educated, or reasonably well-educated Romans, sitting in the stalls, watching the Christians being eaten alive, and actually laughing. Now, we know they don't laugh, that wouldn't quite be au fait, but that's your society. And I have the greatest chronicle ever, because always when I'm on duty, in any way, I have to protect myself by keeping recordings. And I have 15 years of chronicles now. I don't even want to identify areas. But that's the reality of your society. Now, that sounds like, that's going to be a bit boring. Much more interesting. Although that, I've just described what is Lord of the Flies in reality. That's what it is. It's not safe to have a child, a teenager in this country. Far more interesting is actually the way exactly the same, applies in the world of environmentalism, which I was properly interested in protecting the environment 40 years ago, despite spending 7 or 8 years of my youth on proper marginal hill farms. But re-engaging full-time in the environmental work 10 years ago, and then off and on the decade prior. It's exactly the same in the world of environmentalism. Now that gets to me even more, because years ago I knew, in terms of helping the ordinary people, forget it. People who've drifted into compulsive behaviours, they don't often, very rarely, come out properly healthy, centred and at peace. If they do, it takes decades, and their children are so damaged. So I knew that there's no hope 10 years ago. I knew that 10 years ago. I've only been involving myself for the last 4 years. It's like, oh Christ. Well, keeps me occupied a bit, makes me feel like I'm doing something useful. Nobody else was doing anything in COVID year for anybody at all. But the environmental side, I really still care about, but gave up because it's exactly the same in the environmental world. In fact, it's even slightly more pernicious. So, that's who I am, but my real interest in life is how to live super simply on nearly nothing. Now I'm going to wash that in Ecover now.